Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Popcorn and Compliance, a podcast where, with Jay Rosen, we take a look at movies from the compliance perspective. But before we get to our podcast, have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? Would you like to explore some compliance topic? Well, I have founded the Compliance Podcast Network, and I'm looking for new podcasters. If you've wondered how you might start a podcast, please listen to our sponsor, One Stone Creative.
If you are enjoying this show, you might enjoy hosting your own. As an expert in your field, you have skills, knowledge, and insight that can help you expand your practice, meet new people, and create amazing content to share with the world. In as little as 2 hours a week, you can dramatically change how you promote, fill, and position your business. And One Stone Creative can show you how. Learn more at onestonecreative.net.
In honor of the holidays, Jay and I take a look at the classic holiday favorite, Elf, from the compliance perspective. We talk about the film, some of the highlights for us. I take a look at the musical soundtrack and how I thought it worked. And Jay, of course, gives the story from the screenwriter perspective. Popcorn and Compliance is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, the Compliance Evangelist, back again with Jay Rosen, Mr. Monitors, for the second new episode of Popcorn and Compliance. In honor of the holiday season, we decided to do a holiday movie. So this week, we are going to do Elf, the movie. Jay, this turns out to be one of the critics' favorites of Christmas movies. It has been ranked as high as number one in the list of all-time great Christmas films. Several listings rated in the top five. Entertainment Weekly, The Guardian, Hollywood Reporter, Forbes, and others. So Fandango rated it number one. It's truly a favorite. It's a lot of fun to watch. You want to take a breakdown for us on some of the highlights from your recovering screenwriter perspective?
Yeah. First of all, before we get into the storyline, one of the things that I think is really endearing about Buddy, as portrayed by Will Ferrell, is he is kind of a lost soul in a world that he doesn't understand. And in this world, he's the biggest elf ever, and he ends up in New York City, and the only experience he has is being in the North Pole. And movies that I liken this to are Big Tom Hanks, when, as we all know, he wished on the Zoltar machine and wanted to be bigger, and that's what happened to him. There's a movie called 13 Going on 30, Jennifer Garner. There's the original Freaky Friday that you and I probably remember with Jodie Foster, and then they did a remake. And if you want to go back to some literary tradition, you have The Prince and the Pauper, and you have A Tale of Two Cities, where, again, we have people being taken out of their element and trying to learn the rules in their new situation. So basically, as
further, let me just jump in there because actually I was thinking about this, and as you know, I think there are two stories: Hero Takes a Journey or Stranger Comes to Town, and I would take this actually back to the Tale of Gilgamesh, where Gilgamesh takes the journey and meets the stranger Enkidu, and then Enkidu comes to the city. So I see this really as a very long-standing tradition of storytelling. Do you see this as Hero Takes a Journey or Stranger Comes to Town?
I think we could split it right down the middle. I think it has elements of both. I think it's more Stranger Comes to Town for me, because I don't really see Buddy going through the training and having to slay the dragon. I think Buddy Moore learns how to allow his spirit and his infectiousness and his just worldview to permeate the folks who are kind of trapped in the Christmas doldrums. So I would say more Stranger Comes to Town.
Okay. Well, Enkidu appreciates you.
Okay. So why don't you give us a little, set the scene, and you can take us through the conflict, and then I can take us home after that.
So as you correctly note, Buddy the elf is the largest elf ever, and it's because he's not an elf, he's a human. He was accidentally picked up by Santa when he delivered packages to an orphanage, and Buddy climbed into his bag. Nevertheless, he was wearing Buddy diapers, so that's how he got the name Buddy the elf. But he becomes an elf in training, and is rotated through several elf tasks and toy making and other tasks, which he does not really successfully have the elf talents. So at that point in the story, his father, his adoptive father, Papa Elf, played by Bob Newhart, tells him the truth that he's adopted. First of all, his mother gave him up for adoption. And then the story of the orphanage and how he gets to the North Pole, he tells him about his dad, his biological father, Walter, who's played by James Caan. And so Buddy decides to go see him in New York City. And he has some journey. We see a little bit of it. They play the wonderful theme music of the song, of the movie. And he gets to New York. And at that point, as you note, he really is a fish out of water. There are several scenes of just childlike awe where he goes in a revolving door. He eats used gum off of subway entrances. He plays in snow. He takes every piece of paper that's being passed out by hawkers in front of stores, and really just shows what a childlike awe it is to be in a place like New York City at Christmas time. He does find his father. His father immediately recognizes Buddy's mother from old photographs, and he doesn't immediately accede to being the biological father. He does require a DNA test, but the DNA confirms that. And so he takes Buddy to his home. His current wife, I guess his only wife, he never married Buddy's mother. They have a child, and James Caan character works all the time. That's his driving force in life. And so they're fearing the child is very lonely. He wants his father. The wife wants her husband, and Buddy helps facilitate their all coming together. There's a wonderful scene where Buddy meets James Caan's son, who is bullied. He's a little bit smaller, and he's bullied, and he's attacked by boys in Central Park with snowballs. And I was not aware of this till I saw the movie, but elves are the greatest snowball makers and aimers in the world. And Buddy just annihilates a pack of ravenous snowball throwers in Central Park. So his brother and he really bond over that. They hang out and have some great fun. Buddy also finds a love interest, the lovely Zooey Deschanel, who plays a female elf in the Gimbal North Pole store for children. And he has some pretty cute scenes where he asks her out to dinner. They go ice skating. He kisses her. She kisses him back. And that was all very cute as well. But it all comes to a head. One of the jobs Buddy had that he inherited from his father at the North Pole was to fix the rocket engine on Santa's sleigh. You may not know this, Jay, but Santa actually has a rocket on there. It's not simply the reindeer who provide the horsepower. And
I thought he was a green Santa, so it's a little bit disconcerting to realize that there are fossil fuels involved in his Christmas trip around the world.
I knew that would bother you. So as Santa is going through Central Park, because the Christmas spirit is so low, the sleigh crashes, and Buddy stumbles upon Santa, and they find the rocket engine, and Buddy puts the engine on just as in time for the escape from the people who have been permanently put on the naughty list, the Central Park Mounted Police, who are charging after Santa. There's a wonderful scene where Zooey leads the Central Park group of people in Santa Claus is coming to town, and they save the day. Buddy saves the day, and he and Santa go off to the North Pole. And the final scene is Buddy, his now wife, her name is Jovi in the movie, and they have a young elf, Susie the elf, I believe, and they're with Papa Elf at the North Pole. So happy ending for everyone. Really some great scenes in New York City around Macy's, Gimbels, Central Park, in the shopping district, along Times Square. That are really a lot of fun. Some nice snowfalls made it good for the movie. There was one thing I would like to call out, Jay, was the music. And of course, we had numerous Christmas carols: Sleigh Ride, Let It Snow, Baby It's Cold Outside, Jingle Bells, Nutcracker, Santa Baby, Winter Wonderland, and Santa Claus is Coming to Town. But there were two that really stuck out for me and struck me because they were not Christmas carols. They were jazz songs, but they really set the scenes. And that was the opening scene on Pennies from Heaven by Louis Prima. And then in the final scene where he leaves with Santa was Nothing from Nothing by one of my favorite artists, Billy Preston. So the score to the film, I thought, was an integral part of the movie in a very overt way. Usually a score is not as overtly integral, but it's certainly integral. So I really enjoyed the score. Perhaps you might tell us a little bit about the director, because he's had a really interesting career.
Yeah, so some of you might remember Jon Favreau from the independent movie Swingers that came out in 1996. And prior to that, he had done a few made-for-TV movies. He had a bit part in Rudy. But, besides making his debut in Swingers, he also wrote the script. So Swingers was him and Vince Vaughn and Ron Livingston. And after that, Favreau got a chance to direct and made a picture in 2001 called Made, and it was about two bumbling wannabe mafiosos, and it was him and Vince Vaughn. And, it didn't stray too far away from their indie roots. But then we come to 2003, and he gets involved with the property Elf. And I really think he made a quantum leap from making these small personal independent movies to making Elf. And Elf was distributed and produced at the time by New Line Cinema, which is now a part of, I guess it's Time Warner, but Time Warner is now owned by AT&T. So it's got another name. But one of the things that New Line was really known for was being high concept and making their own movies. And then we flash forward from 2003 to 2008. Favreau makes Iron Man and then Iron Man 2. And then after that, he follows it with a very underrated film called Cowboys and Aliens, which came out in 2011, starring Daniel Craig, the current James Bond. And as you can imagine, it's a mashup of a cowboy movie with alien elements. And if you really haven't had a chance to watch that, I would put it on your DVD queue or your download it off Netflix. Then he made another personal movie that I really recommend called Chef, about a very a guy who's really tied into the whole restaurant theme scene in LA and Venice, and he's cooking for the chefs and cooking for those Michelin stars, and he's not really cooking for himself. Then finally, Favreau had another breakthrough a couple of years ago in 2016 with a live-action version of Disney's Jungle Book. And now what's going to be coming out next year, which will probably be another billion-dollar property for Disney, is they've recreated The Lion King using the same techniques that he used in the Jungle Book. So it looks like it's live animals, but they're really photorealistic. So Favreau, I think, has really had a kind of career that you would love to have by coming up, being true to his independent roots, and then getting opportunities to, really entertain and tell stories with heart. And I think Elf really was the crux of this situation, where he really came out there and, blew a lot of people away. And I think you and I are both charmed by the good nature and the great feelings that come from this movie. Will Ferrell, when he was on Saturday Night Live, always really played every character to the hilt. And I was in prepping for our podcast, I was reading an old review from Roger Ebert, and he basically said that this movie had all the opportunities for it to go wrong with an oversized elf, and there could have been really bad jokes made. But I think the good heart of Will Ferrell goes through, and I think it's an infectious and makes this a wonderful Christmas treat for both children and adults alike.
So, Jay, were you able to discern any compliance lessons from Elf?
I got 3. So let me tell you, just like Buddy realizes when he comes to New York City, things are not always as they seem. And if you get no calls on your helpline, that may be a sign that everything is okay. But maybe no calls means that your organization lacks a speak up culture, and you might want to look into the situation while that is happening. The second takeaway I have is it takes time to learn about your environment and discover how to act accordingly. And this argues for our chief compliance officers and ethics and compliance practitioners to get out of your office on the floor, get into the environment of the field, and be with your employees and see how they conduct business and see where you can be of help. And the third thing I take away is that we know Buddy came from a foreign culture, but he continued to initially act like he was in the North Pole, even though he was warned not to pick up the hidden candy on the streets of New York like you alluded to, he did. In time, Buddy learned the rules of the city, and by using his sweet nature, he combined what he knew to get results in the big bad apple.
So the takeaways I took from the movie, let me go back to the music, because that for me, it was really striking, and not so much the Christmas carols, but the two I alluded to, Pennies from Heaven and Nothing from Nothing. And it really drove home to me that you can be creative in your compliance training and your communications. You can use things like audio. You can use things like video. You can even use things like music. We have one colleague, Ronnie Feldman, who uses comedy, and he uses comedy in communication. Certainly Second City has a comedy routine for their compliance training. But with training, in many ways, Jay, you're only limited by your imagination. The second thing was Buddy always had a smile. He always looked on the brighter side of life, to mismash my metaphors. But his for me, one of the keys was he stayed on message, and that message was to always look on the brighter things, to see the best in people, to see the best in every situation. And he was really able to turn it around, turn around the family, turn around his father, his biological father, and turn around Santa's situation when Santa was pretty desperate to deliver the toys to all the boys and girls who were on the nice list and not getting a lump of coal on the naughty list. And then finally, James Caan, a fairly typical workaholic father in the publishing industry, a pretty cutthroat industry. And finally, near the end of the movie, Jay, he recognized that his son was, if not more important, at least equally important. And he left the job. He walked out on his big boss to spend time with his son, who actually needed him. But that led to the realization that he could become a publisher. And so the message there is be prepared. If you're a compliance practitioner, when the opportunity presents itself, it may not present itself in a manner like a CEO walking down and putting his hand on your shoulder and saying, I want you to be the next CCO. You may actually have to take a short detour. You may have to see a door close so that another opens, but be ready for that opportunity and take advantage of it. So a message for the CCO as well. Jay, you came up with a great rating system that we're going to use going forward. Would you like me to give you my rating first this week, or do you want to go?
You go first, sir.
So I'm going to give this, our rating system is overflowing bucket of popcorn, a full bucket of popcorn, a half full bucket of popcorn, and a near empty bucket. I'm going to give this a full bucket of popcorn.
I will also agree on the popcorn meter and go with full. I think it's, as I said before, a wonderful holiday movie. And, I haven't seen it probably since it came out, and it was a real good time spent watching it with the family. So I hope everyone will check it out between now and the holidays. And we'd love to hear back any compliance and ethics messages that you get after you see the film.
So, Jay, you want to take us home for this episode of Popcorn and Compliance?
Sure. On behalf of Tom Fox, the compliance evangelist, and myself, Jay Rosen, Mr. Monitor, we'd like to thank you for joining us for this week's episode of Popcorn and Compliance, the movie's Elf.
Hello again, this is Tom Fox. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Popcorn and Compliance, and I hope you will join us again after the first of the year when Jay and I take a look at our next movie. If you have any questions on this podcast, you can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. You can email Jay at jrosen@affiliatedmonitors.com. We want to wish you and your family a most joyous holiday season and Merry Christmas. Popcorn and Compliance is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.